China just turned an open source AI agent into a national project. Thousands of people are installing OpenClaw because it's the same mass mobilization strategy China has used since the 1950s. When it works, you get global manufacturer dominance. When it doesn't, you get the great leap forward. Three dynamics unfolding in China right now that don't really exist in the US or in the UK. And one of them follows a pattern China has used before with very mixed results. The 4 steps unique Chinese-style playbook. China's approach to new technology is real simple. They pull in people with no formal expertise, set local governments against each other on speed, treat cautious as weakness, and move fast enough that mistakes becomes learning instead of disasters. And this pattern repeats every few years in every frontier industry. Many of us have seen this in textile, batteries, EV, solar panels, rare metals, robotics, and now AI. The great leap forward is the cleanest proof of what happens when it's pointed at the wrong problem, with no honest feedback loop, and the mobilization was too massive to hold halfway. Here's a picture of carriages on minefields. From the year 1958, Mao mobilized peasants to produce steel, and local officials were handed production targets to achieve. The local officials were cheating on the KPIs, while the majority of the output from the backyard furnaces was majority unusable pig iron cast from melted farming tools. In the end, it led to grain rotting in the fields and to 30 million people dying of extreme hunger. The pattern survived. What changed was the target. Now, let's see how it worked when it worked. Made in China. In the year 1990s, Made in China meant cheap toys and textiles. The same 4 moves ran the whole transition. Tens of millions of rural workers left farming, moved into factories, raiding low productivity plots for repetitive works in sectors where they had no prior experience. Coastal cities and provinces competed to attract land plants by offering industries land below cost and bundling it with road power and ports. Places like Shenzhen or Shanghai turned into some of the most prosperous manufacturing hubs on Earth. Yes, the early factories were dirty, chaotic, and even inefficient. But before the year 2000, good enough and shipping always beat perfect and slow 1,000 times for China. Today, China accounts for roughly 29% of the global manufacturing output. The rest of the world depends on it. Yes, there were overbuilt factories for sure, but accidentally, it created a feedback loop. The more they build, the cheaper the next unit and the harder it becomes for anyone else to compete. Scale was the right thing to back, and with scale comes this manufacturing superpower. Where it is now, robotic, that dominance isn't so much about cheap laboring anymore. In 2010, China barely registered in robotic density rankings. To achieve this, they followed the exact same moves. Provinces like Guangdong and Jiangsu threw money at robotic demonstration zones. Mid-tier factories with little to no prior experience joined the automation gold rush. Of course, the early adoptions were wrong in many ways. For example, in 2017, Bloomberg's reporting makes it clear that China's robot push could be just another bubble if they don't adjust the direction and how they subsidize the businesses. China now, however, in 2026, hosts the world's densest hardware stack and accounts for more than half of the global industry robot output. And no other country can replicate the entwined robotic and human joy supply chain depth to threat China's position in the next few decades. Now, in 2026, the nationwide mobilized approach is pointed to OpenClaw. We're watching this exact same 4-step playbook runs once again. This time, the mission code is raising lobsters. Step 1. mass mobilization of non-experts. In early March, nearly thousands of people queued outside of Tencent's Shenzhen headquarters for a free OpenClaw installation. The crowd included a retiree from his 60s, a 9-year-old primary school student, some housewives, and corporate employees who'd taken a day off just for the OpenClaw installation. People whose entire experience of automation was probably WeChat and online shopping. And at the site, there were over 20 Tencent cloud engineers running the operation. What they did was helping them install OpenClaw on their device, loading OpenClaw, connecting AI models, and configuring cloud hosting. And then within days, you see the secondary market emerged. On Xianyu, basically Chinese version of eBay, the freelancers started listing house-call installation services. Basically, what they're saying is, I will sit at your computer and wire the little lobster into your inbox. With some installers also reportedly earning over $36,000 in a matter of days. Many installers themselves weren't even technical experts. They just learned the process online and jumped in. Most buyers of these installation services were people driven by the same fear. They were basically saying, I don't fully understand this yet, but I can't afford being the person who missed it. Hence the market boom. Now, step 2, local governments chip in. Once the racing lobsters caught fire, city and the district governments were also really eager to be the first, trying to get a head start on this agent competition. Shenzhen Longgang drafted a policy called Lobster Ten. Once qualified, you basically get 3 months of free computes, a 30% subsidies of token cost, even 2 months of free accommodations, and 18 months of discounted office space, and so on and so forth, all tailored for one-person companies building on OpenClaw. And another city in China called Wuxi, they also published a really similar policy called Lobster 12, with 12 different measures, including subsidizing up to 5 million of Chinese yuan, that's roughly $700,000 for open source AI projects. Other cities also launched their own styles of raise a lobster packages. Basically, as long as you are a new business registered within the district and propose what you plan on building on top of the little lobster, you have a great chance. Each district is essentially trying to become the center of China's lobster farming. Now, the Chinese-style playbook step 3, revolutionary enthusiasm over technical cautious. One thing to be clear, China's Internet and Cybersecurity Authority actually did issue formal OpenClaw risk warnings, including warnings about server compromises and sensitive data leakage, while the financial institutions were also told to strictly control or even stop deploying similar external platforms. Local governments have probably read the same report, especially those who announced the Lobster 10 or Lobster 12 policies, but they still decided to push it away anyways. Their bet is real simple. The upside of finding new business models outweighs the downside of some messy incidents. Now, the playbook step 4, speed as ideology. OpenClaw project was actually launched in the end of 2025, and then Baidu integrates OpenClaw into its search app, and which has already 7 million of monthly users by February 26. By March 26, you already have Longgang's Lobster 10 and Wuxi's Lobster 12 drafts to go public. The interesting part was that the companies, the local governments, and even ordinary people looked at the AI agents and all decided that it was an opportunity worth chasing nearly simultaneously. The speed at how fast the racing lobster craze moves in is again really astonishing. Now, how does this same math work in the US and the UK? Let's follow $1. China versus UK and the US. What does $1 in China buys you? Metro rides to a Tencent-style booth where an engineer wires an agent into your laptop for you in 10 minutes for free. Or you get to use that $1 to hire someone to install the agent at your home. And even the local governments who turn that same dollar into free cloud subsidies grants and small grants for one-person company who can prove their ability and willingness to build on OpenClaw. Most importantly, handed out at registration, not after a pitch deck, because in China, the unit of bet is an experiment, not a company. That dollar even lands before the idea is clear and even before anyone has proved the business model. Because the bet is tiny messy experiments would always beat picking winners on paper. So what does this same $1 buys you in the UK and the US? So let's start with the UK. This same $1 certainly doesn't buy you a tube ride to a free installation. Well, there was none to begin with. It probably buys you about 0.000 something of grant officers' times while they skim yet another Innovate UK application. If you ever applied for Innovate UK, you would notice so well that how founders spend months in writing these applications for Innovate UK scheme, and even after you won it, the cash will only arrive in arrears. Basically saying, you would need to spend your own cash first, and then you would need to write more reports to claim back eligible costs against the timesheets and invoices. The British government is really holding the money so tight, they don't want to see it actually leaving the Bank of England vaults. The things are slightly better in the US, I admit. In the US, at least $1 ends up in the hands of people who actually runs the company and the experiments. SBIR-style grants routinely offer Phase 1 awards in the low six-figure range, and the Phase 2 awards that can run into seven figures, explicitly designed to fund risky R&D in small firms. That said, in both the UK and the US, most of the in-person AI activity is still industry conferences, invite-only workshops, or internal hackathon days. If you aren't a developer or an enthusiast, you're likely nowhere near these events because you simply don't want to embarrass yourselves. For a random retiree in New York, that dollar doesn't bring you anywhere near an AI agent. A quick comment here, tell me if you think the AI startup grants in your country are up to your expectation. Now let's go back to the question we raised in the introduction. Exactly which version are we now watching? After learning the 4 steps playbook, you realize that China actually hasn't moved far from the Great Leap Forward instinct. Mass mobilization, local competition, faith in speed. And that playbook has failed as spectacularly as it has succeeded. Beijing has already had to zero out entire sectors when an experiment went too far. The peer-to-peer lending boom, where the platform imploded and millions of dollars of retail investors were burned, where the piles of yellow and orange bikes ended up as scrap while most operators went under. If OpenClaw actually goes the P2P or the bike sharing route, we will probably see angry users who lost data, time, or saving, or you will see local governments who are embarrassed quietly shelving lobster policies. And especially these kind of failure would also give an already slow government like the UK a chance, pointing at China and saying, see, that's why we're cautious. However, if it goes the EV, solar, or robotic route instead, we'll see a generation of Chinese founders and operators who treat agents as basic infrastructure, the ways we treat emails. And then we will see a long tail of tiny team or even one-person companies in China running at a cost level that a UK or US firm can never match. At least their rents, their compute, and early mistakes were effectively subsidized. The difference in the OpenClaw case, especially compared to the previous event when they tried the playbook, is that most of the waste is virtual and can be contained. Also note this, 1,000 failed one-person companies cost server time maybe and a bit of grant money. Because the whole point here that China isn't trying to make existing company more productive, but to manufacture a new class of entrepreneurs. So here are 3 questions really worth watching as this develops, especially if you're in the UK or in the US. Who actually shows up in person to participate? Who's willing to front load risks in small chunks? Or are people actually running agents or just installing them? And if you haven't watched my deep dive on OpenClaw itself, what it is, how it works, and why I changed my mind, watch this one next.